Death, the Great Adventure, Part 3. Understanding death, similarities between the near-death experience and the esoteric process of dying. Dr. Kenneth Ring writes that the individual personality is but a split-off fragment of the total self or soul, with which it is reunited at the point of death. Phyllis Atwater notes, as when I previously realized that my body was not me, I also came to realize that Phyllis wasn't me either. She was a personality I had once projected. She was an extension of me, a part I had played, a role I created. Esotericist Charles Leadbeater declares that it is instructive to notice here exactly the true meaning of the word person. It is compounded of the two Latin words, per, meaning through, and sona, meaning sound, and therefore signifies that through which the sound comes, the mask worn by the Roman actor to indicate the part which he happened to be playing at the moment. Thus we very appropriately speak of the group of temporary vehicles which the soul assumes when he descends into incarnation as his persona or personality. Dr. Ring explains that the higher self or soul has total knowledge of the individual personality, both past and future. He notes that various spiritual traditions use such disciplines as meditation to help align the personality with the soul's purpose. Esotericist Annie Besant declares that the higher ego or soul has to act solely through its alter ego, the personal self. Sylvia Cranston writes that the ego or soul remains closely interested in its personality's destiny, inspiring it with its own knowledge and energy through the unspoken language of intuition, dreams, etc. Manly Hall relates that not until the mental body is finally disintegrated does the personality cease to exist. During this period, the individuality slowly dies out and the mental records are transferred to the entity or soul. Dr. Moody reports that the persistent aspect that survives bodily death has been called by many names, among them psyche, soul, mind, spirit, self, being, and consciousness. Some say that death is annihilation of consciousness. Others say with equal confidence that death is the passing of the soul onto another dimension of reality. Esotericist Alice Bailey states that the main characteristic of the soul is consciousness. Roland Peterson emphasizes that what is generally referred to as the soul or ego in man, which should not be confused with the ego as defined by most psychologists, forms the mental plane link between spirit and matter. Annie Besant explains that the word Devachan is the theosophical name for heaven. The Devachanic life consists of two stages. The second is spent in the formless world of the three higher abstract mental subplanes, the thinker or soul escaping from the mental body and living his own unencumbered life in the full measure of the self-consciousness and knowledge to which he has attained. Betty Eady wrote, I was actually relieved to find that the earth is not our natural home, that we did not originate here. I said over and over, I'm home, I'm home, I'm finally home. One of Dr. Moody's subjects stated, it was almost as if I were coming home. Another NDer noted, I felt a greater sense of reality and truth in this state. I felt as if I were home. Esotericist Danny Besant declares that the mental plane is our birthplace and home. She speaks of the formless divisions or subplanes of the mental plane, the region which is man's true home during the cycles of his incarnations. Dr. Ring reports that in this view, the individual personality is but a split-off fragment of the total self or soul with which it is reunited at the point of death. The implication is that qualities of the light so infuse themselves into the core of the experiencer's being as to lead to a complete union with the light. One of his respondents replied, "It's as if by gazing upon this beautiful golden light, the power that it was revitalizing something within the depths of me. There was a transmission of a higher power, knowledge, and understanding, and the oneness of everything." Master DK reveals that there ensues invariably a moment of direct soul contact. Arthur Powell states that every human being on the completion of his life on the astral and lower mental planes obtains at least a flash of consciousness of the ego or soul in the causal body. The more developed, of course, have a definitely conscious period, living as the ego on its own plane. Dr. Ring notes, Moody spoke of a being of light. I submit that this presence is actually oneself. It is not merely a projection of one's personality, however, but one's total self or soul, or what in some traditions is called the higher self. This higher self is so foreign to one's individualized consciousness that one perceives it as separate from oneself, as unmistakably other. It manifests itself as a brilliant golden light, but it is actually oneself in a higher form that one is seeing. Esotericist Sylvia Cranston writes that the big problem in NDE research is to identify the being of light. In theosophy, that being is said to be one's own higher self or soul. Master Dwal Kul states that the soul is that latent or subjective essential quality which makes itself felt as light or luminous radiation. It is the self shining from within, which is characteristic of all forms. He also notes that the greater light is that of the soul, who is light itself illuminating the manifestation of the threefold personality. Dr. Ring states that it seems that what the NDE does, at least in some cases, enables the individual to come into a new and more authentic sense of self. Dr. Eben Alexander observed that our eternal spiritual self is more real than anything we perceive in this physical realm. Esotericists Cranston and Williams state that the real individual is not his or her body. Charles Leadbeater writes that it is the spiritual ego or soul which is the real man, not the various bodies which on the lower planes represent him. Dr. Ring said that the psychological state of detached observation or reflection is typical chiefly of the out-of-body stage of the experience. One of his respondents noted, "Mentally, I think I was just observing. I didn't feel as though it was happening to me at all. I was just the observer." The Tibetan master remarks that life is approached from the angle of the observer or soul, and not from that of a participator in the experience in the three worlds, physical, emotional, mental. Dr. Raymond Moody says, interestingly, while the above description of the being of light is utterly invariable, the identification of the being varies from individual to individual and seems to be largely a function of the religious background, training, and beliefs of the person involved. Christians identify the light as Christ. A Jewish man and woman identified the light as an angel. A man who had no religious beliefs simply identified what he saw as a being of light. Dr. Melvin Morris wrote that a master being of light appears. Some call him God, others Allah, others the Messiah. Dr. Kenneth Ring reasoned that since most people are used to thinking dualistically of God as somehow up there, while they remain down here, they can be expected to interpret their experience with their higher self or soul as a direct encounter with God. The idea of God is, after all, more familiar to most people than is the notion of a higher self. The Tibetan Book of the Dead states, "The great body of union in Bordeaux will appear in whatever shape will benefit all beings whatsoever." Thus, to appeal to a Shaivite devotee, the form of Shiva is assumed. To a Buddhist, the form of Buddha Shakyamuni. To a Christian, the form of Jesus. To a Muslim, the form of the Prophet, and so on for other religious devotees. Dr. Moody states that whoever he is, the being radiates total love and understanding, so much so that most people want to be with it forever. One of his subjects responded, "It is a light of perfect understanding and perfect love, and all during this time I felt as though I were surrounded by an overwhelming love and compassion." Esotericist Sylvia Cranston discusses the unexpected encounter with their own individual ego self or soul, which seems to bear them a total love and acceptance. Master Dwal Kul describes the light of the soul, which is the pure energy of love. Dr. Moody says that several people told me that during their encounters with death, they got brief glimpses of an entire realm of existence in which all knowledge, whether past, present, or future, seemed to coexist in a sort of timeless state. Alternately, this has been described as a moment of enlightenment in which the subject seemed to have complete knowledge. Dr. Ring reports that the higher self or soul, furthermore, has total knowledge of the individual personality, both past and future. This is why, when it is experienced as a voice, it seems to be an all-knowing one. One of his respondents described the light as the fount of universal knowledge. Yet another noted that the being of light who was with him at one point made a gesture with his right hand, and there followed a panoramic vision impossible to describe, showing everything from the beginning of time to the end of time. Master D.K. states that the soul is omniscient and omnipotent. Annie Besant remarks that the higher ego or soul, as part of the essence of the universal mind, is unconditionally omniscient on its own plane, on the three higher subplanes of the mental plane. The soul is the vehicle of all knowledge of the past, the present, and the future. Dwal Kul tells us that there is the radiant body of the soul itself, found on its own higher mental plane, and called frequently the Karana Sarira, or causing body, or the causal body. In Theosophy, the ego or soul is postulated as a true individual who periodically puts down portions of himself into personalities through successive incarnations. Roland Peterson states that the causal body, termed the temple of the soul, is ovoid in shape, surrounding the physical body, and is described as ranging from the appearance of a colorless bubble in primitive man to a sphere of the most lovely and delicate hues, an object beautiful beyond conception in any individual who is unselfish and capable of abstract thought. The New Testament refers to the causal body as that body not made with hands, eternal in the heavens. Annie Besant notes that this causal or soul body is the egoides of the Neoplatonists and the spiritual body of St. Paul. Leadbeater stresses that there was also the crater or cup, always associated with Dionysus and emblematical of the causal body of man, which has ever been symbolized by a cup filled with the wine of the divine life and love. The tradition of this passed down through the ages and became mingled with that of the Holy Grail, which played so great a part in early medieval romance and legend. This crater or grail became identified with the chalice used by Jesus at the Last Supper for the founding of the Holy Eucharist. The chalice symbolically represents the causal body into which the blood of the mysteries is poured. James Perkins writes that in each of the three worlds, physical, astral, and mental, the permanent atoms store the total vibratory capacity that has been developed by the soul throughout the ages of his evolution in those levels of matter. When the ego or indwelling soul withdraws into the causal body, he takes with him his physical and astral permanent atoms and his mental unit or molecule. These particles of matter, one only of each of the three lower planes, remain with the ego or soul throughout the whole of his human incarnations. Whilst they are withdrawn into the causal body, they are in a quiescent or latent condition. Annie Besant indicates that the lower mind gathers experience to carry it back to its source, the soul. The higher mind accumulates the stores throughout the cycle of reincarnation. Besant further declares that the thinker or soul withdraws his life entirely into the formless Devachanic or higher mental world in his own native habitat. Thence all the experiences of his life period in the three worlds are transmuted into faculties and powers for future use and contained within himself. James Perkins notes that the soul's evolutionary function, while there on the higher mental plane, is to transmute past experience into faculty and achieve skills into innate talent. Charles Hampton reveals that this swift examination of the tablets of memory, or the life review, when dying, forms the basis for the process of assimilation of experience into character and conscience. Dr. Moody reports that the being of light presents to the ND ears a panoramic, wraparound, full-color, three-dimensional vision of the events of their lives. Some see the review as unfolding very rapidly in a chronological sequence. Others see it as instantaneous, with every life experience visible at once. As they witness the display, the being of light seems to stress the importance of two things in life: learning to love other people and acquiring knowledge. Even the emotions and feelings associated with the images may be re-experienced as one is viewing them. Betty Eady says, "My comprehension included much more than I remember happening during each event of my life. I not only re-experienced my own emotions at each moment, but also what others around me had felt. I experienced their thoughts and feelings about me." Evans Wentz states that esotericism speaks of the Book of Judgment. This is an objective symbol of the Book of Memory. The reading of that book is the recalling to mind by the dying man of the whole of his past life on earth before he passes from it. Charles Hampton notes that everyone will experience this marvelous review of life. Each person will find that the events of a long life, their minutest details, are marshaled into the greatest order in a few seconds of time. James Perkins declares that during his dying hours there takes place a flash review of all that has been experienced in the life now closed. This swift playback of one's life track the microfilmed history, as it were, of one's entire life is the final act of a process that has been operating throughout life. That is, the recording of a person's every experience upon one single physical atom, termed the permanent atom. The results of the review in heaven on the mental plane are recorded upon the mental permanent atom. Arthur Powell reports that every human being on the completion of his life on the astral or lower mental planes obtains at least a flash of consciousness of the ego or soul in the causal body. The more developed, of course, have a definitely conscious period, living as the soul on its own plane, the three higher subplanes of the mental plane. In the momentary flash of soul consciousness, the man sees his last life as a whole and gathers from it the impression of success or failure in the work which it was meant to do. Together with this, he also has a forecast of the life that lies before him, with the knowledge of the general lesson which that is to teach, or the specific progress which he is intended to make in it. Dr. Moody relates that at this point, one might say a kind of judgment took place. It is interesting to note that the judgment in the cases I have studied came not from the being of light, who seemed to love and accept these people anyway, but rather from within the individual being judged. In this state, they seem to have seen for themselves what they should and shouldn't have done, and to have judged themselves accordingly. One of his respondents noted that the only thing I felt judged by would be myself. I think the judging was mainly myself judging myself. Ralph Metzner writes that such life review visions may be the experimental basis for the metaphor of the judgment scene found in many after-death myths, where the good and bad deeds of one's life are assessed and weighed. Esoteric philosophy teaches that after death there is a review of lessons and mistakes made in this life. Variations on this theme abound in every culture. In Egyptian myth, the heart of the deceased is weighed in a scale against the truth feather of the goddess Ma'at. In Tibetan Buddhism, it is taught that the death god Yama holds a mirror up to the recently deceased in which they can see all their deeds and intentions. Dr. Ken Ring says that one possibility that recurrently crops up in the literature on NDEs is that of reincarnation, the doctrine that a person's soul may have more than one physical existence in human form. Although variants of this doctrine were acceptable to and promulgated by the early church fathers, reincarnation was declared heretical and expunged from Christian dogma in the 6th century. In the public mind, therefore, it has come to be associated primarily with Eastern religions, such as Hinduism and Buddhism. Ring adds that NDEers do appear to be more inclined to a reincarnational perspective following their experience, and not surprisingly, appear to be more sympathetic to Eastern religions as well. Furthermore, my findings seem to be consistent with the data of other researchers. Drs. Groff and Halifax report that the belief in reincarnation occurs in such diverse cultural and religious frameworks as philosophies and religions of India, cosmologies of various North American Indian tribes, Platonic and Neoplatonic philosophy, the Orphic cult and other mystery religions of ancient Greece, and early Christianity. In Hinduism, Buddhism, and Jainism, this belief is connected with the law of karma, according to which the quality of individual incarnations is specifically determined by the person's merits and debits from preceding lifetimes. Phyllis Atwater writes that I've noticed near-death experiencers usually have a feeling or knowing that the soul evolves through various cycles, often taking lifetimes to expand on its experience and learning. They talk about reincarnation as if it were an established fact, and almost to a person mention a life plan and speak of how our lives follow rhythmic cycles of development. One of Margot Gray's respondents replied, "During my experience, I became aware of all my past lives and all the future lives I would have." One of Dr. Ring's respondents observed that I really believe that death is just part of a continuous cycle. I think when you are born, consciousness is enveloped with a body, and you grow, and you develop, and you learn. And I believe that you try to attain, whether you're aware of it or not, you develop a greater awareness of higher consciousness. I feel that with each death, it's like taking off an old coat and putting on another one to grow further and further in consciousness until you become one with God or with creation or with whatever it is, whatever that great thing is. Master Drawal Kool states that all lives manifest cyclically. This is the theory of rebirth or of reincarnation, the demonstration of the law of periodicity. Cranston and Williams declare the word reincarnation is derived from Latin and means coming again into bodies of flesh. Human flesh, of course, not the distorted version common in the Orient of regression into animals and insects. Dr. Ring notes that the being of light communicated to an NDE specific information after his NDE, clearly indicating that reincarnation was a reality. Another respondent declared, "I believe in reincarnation also. I believe in it, very definitely." Ring adds that in some cases, NDEers seem to have what is not merely a past life, but a past lives review. That is, they claim to be aware of events from their previous incarnations or simply the fact that they have lived before. One of his respondents gave him a detailed account of the mechanics of reincarnation. The Tibetan Master Drawal Kool reveals that on the inner side, men know that the law of rebirth governs the experience of physical plane living, and they realize then that prior to the elimination of the astral and mental bodies, they are only passing through an interlude between incarnations, and that they consequently face two great experiences. One, a moment, long or short, according to the attained point in evolution, wherein contact will be made with the soul or with the solar angel. 2. After that contact, a relatively violent reorientation to earth life takes place, leading to what is called the process of descent and calling, wherein the man A. prepares for physical incarnation again, B. sounds his own true note into the substance of the three lower worlds, C. revitalizes the permanent atoms which form a triangle of force within the causal body, D. gathers together the needed substance to form his future bodies of manifestation, E. colors them with the qualities and characteristics he has already achieved through life experience, F. on the etheric plane, he arranges the substance of his vital or etheric body so that the seven centers take shape and can become the recipients of the inner forces. G. He makes a deliberate choice of those who will provide him with the needed dense physical covering and then awaits the moment of incarnation. Esoteric students would do well to remember that parents only donate the dense physical body. They may also provide a measure of group relationship where the soul experiences long and a true group relation has been established. The Tibetan declares that the particular month in which a soul comes into incarnation is indicated by the month in which it passed out of incarnation in its previous life cycle. If it, for instance, died in the month governed by the sign Leo, it will return into incarnation in the same sign, picking up the thread of experience where it left it and starting with the same type of energy and the peculiar equipment with which it passed away from Earth. I would just add that near the end of the vast incarnational cycle of a human being, spanning thousands of lifetimes or personalities and millions of years, one eventually discovers and treads the three paths of probation, discipleship, and initiation. Through a graded series of major expansions of consciousness known as initiations, the soul-infused personality eventually succeeds in liberating itself from the cycle of necessity or the wheel of rebirth. One is then no longer compelled to reincarnate as has previously been the case. However, the individual may choose to incarnate under the law of service to assist those who are still bound to the cycle of reincarnation under the law of karmic liability. I will let the Tibetan master Djwhal Khul have the last words regarding death and the esoteric process of withdrawal. Death, if we could but realize it, is one of our most practiced activities. We have died many times and shall die again and again. Death is essentially a matter of consciousness. We are conscious one moment on the physical plane, and a moment later we have withdrawn into another plane and are actively conscious there. Just as long as our consciousness is identified with the form aspect, death will hold for us its ancient terror. Just as soon as we know ourselves to be souls and find that we are capable of focusing our consciousness, our sense of awareness, in any form or on any plane at will or in any direction within the form of God, we shall no longer know death. Death, the Great Adventure, Part 3.